After dropping out of high school, M stayed home playing games, occasionally resorting to acting cute to beg his mother for living expenses. To defraud his cancer-stricken grandmother, Mingjiu, of her substantial inheritance, he began visiting her more frequently than usual. He first bought some beef offal for Mingjiu, unaware that Mingjiu, due to her devotion to guanyin, could not eat beef. Helplessly, he went to buy Mingjiu's favorite fried fish, but the small stall was packed with people. So, on a whim, he bought a similar fried fish from a less crowded shop. M thought he could get away with it, but Mingjiu saw through his trick, forcing him to queue again. To his surprise, after M finally bought the fish, Mingjiu claimed she was full. Looking at the remaining fish bones on the table, M angrily threw the fried fish onto the table. But for the sake of the substantial inheritance, he wasn't about to give up caring for Mingjiu. So, when Mingjiu prepared to make a tranquilizing tea, he immediately stepped forward, pretending to help. However, instead of boiling water in a kettle, he simply heated it in the microwave. This completely infuriated the devout Mingjiu, who immediately kicked him out of the house. Seeing this method was ineffective, M immediately thought of his cousin, Mui, who had more experience caring for the elderly. M wanted to learn from Mui about elder care. It turned out that M's grandfather had recently passed away. He had been paralyzed in bed for a year before his death, and the person who had been caring for him at his bedside was Mui, a young yet understanding woman. At first, M couldn't understand. Why would such a beautiful girl, as charming as a flower, so tirelessly serve an elderly man, even patiently cleaning up his excrement every day? Upon his death, his children received only a small share. Mui inherited his grandfather's estate, and only then did he realize how far-sighted Mui had been.
Inspired by this, M decided to emulate Mui and care for Mingjiu, who was in the late stages of cancer. After a day of repeated attempts, M still couldn't grasp the key, so he finally sought guidance from Mui. Mui's words were frank and heartwarming, highlighting the elderly man's longing for family companionship far more than material things. Gold, silver, jewelry, and delicacies couldn't compare to the long-term presence of family. A single day of companionship felt too short compared to such a longing. M was curious about how Mui could tolerate the smell of the elderly man's excrement. Mui explained, when you spend enough time with someone, you no longer smell the smell. M's understanding dawned on him, and he immediately returned home, packed his belongings, and moved in with peace of mind. Before arriving, he had even sold all his gaming equipment and used the proceeds to buy Mingjiu a ton of things. But Mingjiu expressed no welcome for this uninvited guest and even ordered him to leave on the spot. To justify his stay, M revealed Mingjiu's advanced colon cancer and even resorted to emotional tactics. M remembered how Mingjiu had tirelessly cared for him for many years when he lived here as a child, and now it was his turn to care for Mingjiu. Hearing these sincere and caring words, Mingjiu's attitude softened, and he tacitly agreed to M's stay. M even specifically promised to wake up at 4 a.m. the next morning to help Mingjiu set up his stall. As expected, M overslept, and by the time he staggered to the stall in his slippers, Mingjiu was already preparing to close. He had no choice but to accompany Mingjiu home, feeling frustrated. However, on the way home, they encountered a female neighbor who also suffered from cancer. Compared to Mingjiu, the female neighbor had always lived alone, so naturally she envied Mingjiu for having a grandson to look after her. Looking at her envious gaze, M felt he had earned Mingjiu's trust, and a bright smile spread across his face.
Unexpectedly, Mingjiu remained wary of him. Not only did he not allow him to accompany her to the bank to deposit money, but he also locked many rooms in his house. However, M didn't mind for now, as he still had a year to fight for his chance. On Sunday, Mingjiu suddenly donned beautiful new clothes and a pair of new shoes that didn't fit him well. Then he sat on a chair outside his room, looking eagerly toward the intersection. It turned out that today was the day for his children to visit together, and it was also the happiest day of Mingjiu's life on his own. However, on what should have been a warm and harmonious day, his two sons argued over medical bills. However, just as they were arguing, the little granddaughter approached Mingjiu and said she would study medicine when she grew up so she could cure him. Then the quarrel abruptly ceased. Who could have imagined that a room full of adults would be less sensible than a little girl? The children nearby also realized their shame and immediately stepped forward to express their filial piety. But soon, the children all left, fearing that the burden of financial and physical support would truly fall on them. However, there was someone in the family who truly cared about Mingjiu, and that person was M's single mother. However, in times of crisis, it was his mother who always bore the greatest burden. At first, M thought his mother was motivated by the inheritance, but later he realized that she was the one who gave most sincerely. His mother even switched from day to night shift to make time for Minju's chemotherapy. But when Minju found out, she didn't appreciate it, and the two had a huge argument. Ultimately, the responsibility of accompanying Minju through chemotherapy fell to M. The day of Minju's first chemotherapy session soon arrived. Before dawn, M helped Minju to the hospital. Even though consultations didn't start until 8 a.m., the hospital was already packed at 4 a.m. And everyone had already reserved their seats with their shoes. M could only follow the shoes scattered on the ground, circling the line until he reached the end. During chemotherapy, Mui also came to help. Seeing Minju alone in the ward receiving an 4 drip, Mui suggested that M stay with her next time, as this would be a good opportunity to gain Minju's trust. M took this advice to heart. It was already noon when Minju returned home after completing chemotherapy. A frail Minju handed M the bag of money and told him where the money jar was. This also showed that M had gained Minju's trust. However, just when M was beginning to see hope, her uncle suddenly changed his usual stingy attitude. For the first time, her uncle took Minju to his large villa, knelt beside her, and sincerely told her that she could live there peacefully and that he was willing to be her full-time son. Hearing her uncle's rare words, Minju felt both relieved and sad. Having lived for most of her life, she understood the meaning of her children and grandchildren's uncharacteristic displays of affection. But if that meant she could see her children more often, she didn't care how sincere it was. But M absolutely wouldn't tolerate anyone cutting in halfway, so she firmly opposed Minju living there. In response, her uncle offered him some money, trying to get rid of him with this small favor. But M claimed he wasn't caring for Minju for the money, even making a defiant gesture. Seeing this, her uncle gave her a look of understanding, as if to say, "We're all reasonable people, why all the fuss?" But Minju still had to decide whether to stay or go. So, to curry Minju's favor once again, her uncle took her to the temple to pray. But as they climbed the stairs, he noticed she was walking too slowly and left both her and M behind. Little did he know that Minju's slowness was due to the new shoes her uncle had bought her, which were several sizes too small. But what chilled Minju even more was that her prayer card was filled with blessings for her children and grandchildren. But not a single one of her uncle's family's prayer cards contained a prayer for Minju. Seeing this, M couldn't help but complain, "My uncle doesn't really want to live with you. He's just sowing seeds, hoping to reap the harvest later." But Minju explained that her uncle had his own family and naturally had to consider them first. Still unconvinced, M retorted, "Aren't you his family?" and left in a huff. Though Minju pretended to be indifferent, she couldn't help but glance at the prayer cards before leaving. Minju discovered that M's prayer card, though only 2 lines long, was filled with blessings for Minju. Before this, Minju had always worn the shoes her uncle had given her, even if they were tight. But the moment she emerged from the temple, she told M, "I want to change my shoes." M immediately accompanied her to the mall and patiently selected the most comfortable new pair. At this moment, Minju suddenly said to M with profound meaning, "You're sowing seeds, hoping to reap a harvest, aren't you?" M's mind went blank, and after a few seconds, he stammered, "I'm different from my uncle." Then, jokingly, he added, "Because I just want to be your full-time grandson." Looking at this slick youngster, Minju unexpectedly felt reassured. From then on, M became Minju's most trusted person. Minju naturally didn't agree to move in with her uncle, but continued to live with M in the old house. As they spent time together day after day, M gradually mastered Minju's porridge-making secrets, a skill he could truly master. The relationship between the two seemed to have returned to their childhood, as they shared a bed and told stories before falling asleep. Even Minju's back, which she couldn't reach during the shower, was freely asked for M's help. To keep tabs on Minju's condition, M even installed a camera at home. Gradually, the two of them even forgot about the cancer. But happy times are always short-lived. As her chemotherapy treatments increased, Minju's hair began to fall out in clumps. She didn't want M to see her distress, but her embarrassment, with nowhere to hide, was clear to see. But M didn't offer any bland consolations. Instead, she turned on the beauty camera and told her that even with all her hair gone, she could still look cool. But watching Minju sleeping soundly, her clothes stained with white hair, M couldn't help but feel distressed. The train still ran by Minju's house every day, and her condition continued to progress, yet her family's concern for her became less and less. Even on the scheduled family reunion day, her 3 children refused to show up for various reasons. Fortunately, with M by her side, Minju didn't feel particularly lonely. Minju said, "I hate the day after Lunar New Year the most because the refrigerator is overflowing with leftovers, and I have to eat them all by myself." As she said this, the usually strong Minju choked up for the first time. Then she whispered, "It's so nice to have you around." M then truly felt the loneliness Mingju had endured all those years of living alone. Even the refrigerator was overflowing with uneaten leftovers. However, Minju's children not only failed to provide her with company, but also coveted her wealth. One day, Minju suddenly discovered that the money in her piggy bank had been stolen at some point. At first, Minju thought M had taken it, but after watching the surveillance footage, she realized the real thief was her idle youngest son. It turned out that her uncle owed millions in gambling debts. Some time ago, when Minju's uncle came to install a toilet handrail, he not only stole the pork floss from the cupboard, but also robbed Minju of all his savings. This is precisely why he was afraid to attend family gatherings. Minju, heartbroken upon learning the truth, uttered no complaints. Because she had always known her youngest son was a failure, she had secretly helped him a lot. But M couldn't bear this, because the money was the hard-earned money Mingju had saved by selling porridge from dawn to dusk. So, he immediately rushed to his uncle's house to demand responsibility. But after learning about his uncle's situation, he actually took out all the family assets he had inherited from his grandfather, just to make his uncle disappear for a while longer. It turned out that Mingju had told M that the person she least wanted to see was her youngest son, because as long as he wasn't around, it meant he was doing well. M didn't want to burden Mingju with worrying about her uncle anymore, so she used this method to relieve her worries. But when she returned home, M lied to Mingju, saying her uncle was away working. But just as she finished speaking, a stranger knocked on the door. Mingju, assuming it was her youngest son's creditor, asked M to hide while she went to deal with the person. Unexpectedly, the man wasn't asking for money, but to buy the old house. As he spoke, he displayed the house's for sale listing, and the seller's name was M. It turned out that when M first came to care for Mingju, he had posted photos of the house and its surroundings online. But later, his pretense began to bleed into sincerity, and he stopped responding to the online inquiries. The man, unable to contact the seller, had chosen to come and look at the house on his own initiative. Learning the truth was a shocking blow to Mingju. After sending the visitor away, she sank down in a chair, feeling heartbroken. She had suspected M had ulterior motives, but the stark truth was hard to accept. However, Mingju didn't expose the lie out of hand. Instead, she took out the shirt she had bought for M. As Mingju dressed M, she said, "After she finishes her 3rd chemotherapy, you won't have to stay and take care of her anymore." Mingju remembered that M was top of her class as a child, and she was sure to be successful now. After that, she walked out to the yard, plucked the largest pomegranate from the tree, and peeled it herself for M to eat. The younger son had always wanted to eat the pomegranate, but Mingju always sternly stopped him. At the time, the younger son thought Mingju was saving it for the older son. Unexpectedly, this pomegranate was M's special gift, stemming from a remark he'd made as a child. "The pomegranates from this tree are only for me to eat." Although M no longer remembered these words, Mingju never forgot this promise. Watching M eating the pomegranate, Mingju suddenly said with a hint of self-reproach, "Child, I always said you were a failure. I was wrong." Hearing this, M was once again moved, and she said from the bottom of her heart, "Let me stay here for a while. I'll leave when you're well again." Mingju stopped trying to persuade her and instead asked M to accompany her to a place the next day. That place was Mingju's brother's home. It turned out that before their death, Minju's parents had left their entire house and savings to her brother. Now her brother lived a wealthy life with a happy family, but Mingju was ill, penniless, and without support. So, Mingju wanted to borrow some money to buy a large burial plot. Her brother believed that the money belonged to him and denied his sister's efforts in caring for her parents and handling their funeral arrangements. He also belittled his sister as an outsider and assumed her husband would squander the inheritance. He refused to give her any money, demonstrating a selfish and mean attitude. Mingju never imagined that the siblings she had grown up with could now be so cold-blooded and heartless. Furthermore, Minju's husband was forced upon her by her parents, leaving her with no chance to choose her own path. Despite the unspeakable heartache, Minju remained respectful and stopped pestering her. On the way home, M puzzled over why Minju insisted on buying a large plot of land, considering the body turns to soil after death, and argued that size didn't matter. Minju explained that a beautiful plot would not only show the child's filial piety, but also perhaps encourage them to visit the grave. It turned out that Minju wasn't obsessed with a plot of land. He was afraid that no one would remember him after his death. But death doesn't show mercy or kindness to humans simply because of our fears. Even with chemotherapy, Minju's condition showed no signs of improvement. Every day, M could hear Minju's cries of pain, and when things got worse, she could hear him desperately begging for death. But M couldn't bear to let Minju go, so he kept running to the hospital, begging for help. But the doctors were powerless and even suggested that Minju return home to spend her final days in peace. However, compared to Minju's physical suffering, her children seemed more concerned about her inheritance. So, while Minju was still in the hospital undergoing her final checkups, the adults outside began arguing over the house. However, Minju had already made arrangements, and the house was ultimately transferred to his gambling-addicted youngest son. Upon hearing this, M was heartbroken. He hadn't expected his utmost dedication would ultimately be outmatched by his idle uncle. As soon as Minju regained consciousness, he angrily demanded to know why the house had been transferred to his uncle, a man of poor character. Minju simply replied, "He can't take care of himself." Still unconvinced, M pressed Minju, "If I've taken such good care of you, why is your uncle always the most important thing in her heart?" It turned out that after nearly a year of living together, M's love for Minju far surpassed the house. But the house was like a medal, a reward for being number one in Minju's heart. So, rather than caring more about the house, M cared more about his importance in Minju's heart. But when questioned, Minju said nothing, simply watching M's departure with tears in his eyes. After that, M never visited Minju again, returning to his usual parasite, never leaving the house, spending his days playing games. Only when Mui needed his help did he reluctantly leave the house. It turned out that another of Mui's childless but wealthy relatives had fallen seriously ill. Knowing her experience caring for the elderly, her relatives asked her to take care of the deceased during his final journey. Mui wanted M to come and help so they could split the final inheritance equally. But M remained unmoved. Instead, she asked Mui if she had ever dreamed of her late grandfather. Mui suddenly choked up, saying that she knew how to help her grandfather when he was choking, but in the end, she didn't. Grandpa had said it was time to let him go and go to a better place, and she assumed he had truly gone, so she hadn't dreamed of him once. M suddenly realized that after death, one can never see another again, and even dreaming of him is a luxury. So, upon returning home, he couldn't help but turn on the surveillance camera, but all he saw was Minju's loneliness. She got up alone, watered the flowers, watched TV, and used her beauty camera, entertaining herself, just as she had when M was by her side. Minju longed to enjoy family happiness in her final moments, but she waited under the pomegranate tree for a long time, but her family reunion was in vain. Because the inheritance had already been decided, her children had no reason to curry favor. Furthermore, her youngest son quickly sold the old house to pay off his gambling debts. And her eldest uncle, who had once been eager to let Minju live with him, didn't keep his promise and instead dumped Minju in a nursing home. M couldn't bear to see Minju suffer any more loneliness, so he rushed to the nursing home the next day. But upon entering, he saw Minju's frail body curled up on a small, hard bed. This sight filled him with a wave of heartache and only solidified his resolve to bring Minju home. And so, Minju moved into M's home. But soon after arriving home, Minju began to clean out the refrigerator without her permission. M's mother tried to stop her, but Minju insisted that her daughter couldn't afford to eat expired food like her, constantly eating it. Since cancer can be hereditary, she needed to be more careful. M's mother understood Minju's good intentions, but she still complained, "I know my son will inherit the property, and my daughter will inherit the cancer." Minju's face immediately smacked with guilt. Minju knew her debt to her daughter and didn't want her to sacrifice her work time to care for her. But she was bound by feudal ideology, and even though she had suffered, she unconsciously applied this logic to her children and grandchildren. The Lunar New Year arrived in the blink of an eye. If nothing unexpected happened, this would be Minju's last spring festival at home. But her uncle, resentful, refused to get out of the car to see Mingju. M told her uncle that Mingju loved beef when she was young. To restore her always ill uncle's health, she prayed to Guanyin, the goddess of mercy, on the condition that she abstain from beef for the rest of her life. With M's persuasion, her uncle finally let go of his worries. Soon after, Minju's condition worsened again. She longed to end her physical pain and suffering, yet also dreaded the approach of death. At these moments, M would gently hold her hand and sing her favorite lullaby. As a child, Mingju had always sung a ballad to lull M to sleep, and now it was M's turn to hum the same tune, allowing Mingju to enter an eternal sleep without fear. Thus, Mingju ended her ordinary life and entered a brighter world. M also purchased a large plot of land for her grave, fulfilling her only lifelong wish. It turned out that Minju's fondness for M extended beyond the pomegranate tree in front of her door. Back when M was in elementary school, Mingju had him open a bank account and regularly deposit money into it. But M was young and naive at the time, so he had no recollection of this. On the way to the bank, memories suddenly flooded back into M's mind like a galloping train. And to repay Minju's deep love, M unhesitatingly withdrew all his savings and bought a $1 million burial plot for Mingju. On the way to the cemetery, all three of his children burst into tears, but only M smiled. Because he was the only one who had a clear conscience towards Mingju, the only one who put Mingju first in his heart. To help Mingju find his way home, he tapped on the coffin along the way, recounting every corner he passed. Before her death, Mingju once said to M, "If you carelessly scatter flowers after I die, I will definitely come back to settle the score." M took this to heart, so every time he visited the grave, he would deliberately and carelessly scatter all the petals onto the grass. I hope Mingju will one day fulfill her promise. That's all for today's movie. Please like, comment, and share. Thank you for your patience. I look forward to seeing you again.